emotions are often quite complex. It can be hard to understand them. It can be really challenging to express them in a way that is healthy. In a recent video, I spoke about anger, and I mentioned how anger is often secondary to a couple of other emotions, which makes it even more complex. So today, I'm going to go into that a little bit further to really understand so that you can process, understand, and express your anger a little bit differently. Welcome, I'm Peggy Oliveira. Thanks so much for joining me. So the two emotions that anger is often secondary to, and what I mean by that is that when there's something that happens and you feel this rising energy of anger, and there's a spectrum of anger, right? It can go from like a mild annoyance or frustration to rage. And I want to be clear, there's nothing wrong with anger. Anger itself is not bad. There's a reason that we have the ability to experience anger. There's benefit even in some types of anger, depending on what you do with it. So, when we experience anger, especially in the context of relationships and interpersonal types of things, most often it can be really helpful to ask yourself when you're feeling that kind of ongoing energy, okay, if I was afraid of something right now, what might it be? Or if I was feeling hurt by something right now, what might it be? Because anger is almost always secondary to hurt or fear. And it's so interesting because a lot of times when I'm having a conversation like this with people, they'll say, well, I'm not afraid of anything. I'm not feeling hurt. I'm angry. I'm mad. And of course, it's true that they could be mad, but the intensity of that emotion is often because they're feeling hurt by something, by an action or an inaction of somebody else. Whether that action or inaction was intentional or not, but they're feeling hurt. And for a lot of people, anger can be a coping mechanism in this regard. Anger feels more powerful. Anger feels even motivating in a sense to do something, to resolve it, to fix it. Often not in a healthy way, but that's beside the point when it comes to how this happens or why it happens. But if you think about that, right, if you feel hurt, you often don't really feel this motivating energy to fix it, right? It feels bad. You might feel sad. You might feel grief. You might feel disappointment. You might be worried about what it means for the relationship. But if you feel anger, then none of those other feelings are there. It's just anger. When we feel anger as a result of fear, what's interesting about it is that it is often related to fear of being hurt. Not always, but sometimes it is. And people will say, well, I'm not afraid of being hurt because I know I'm going to be okay. Well, that may be true on some level. But at the slightest indication, sometimes of somebody feeling a certain way or doing something that might feel difficult for you, and it might just be your perception of it, anger can come up to help create a buffer from feeling into that fear, that worry, or potentially even that hurt. So just take a moment and notice where your mind is going. What is your immediate response? Either in your thoughts or what's happening in your body as you listen to that. There are times that anger is completely appropriate and even potentially healthy. There's nothing wrong with anger. Unfortunately, we're not taught how to deal with emotions in general, and we're certainly not taught how to deal with anger. People are afraid of anger, and there are plenty of good reasons for that throughout our history, throughout our families even. But anger is showing up for a reason, and part of it is motivation and energy to resolve it, to change it in some way. But because we don't learn how to express and manage anger, or to even understand anger, we aren't able to actually do the things that are helpful in managing it. So, for example, if somebody, let's say you're communicating with somebody, you're messaging somebody back and forth over maybe many years. So it's somebody you've got a relationship with. And maybe there's something within you that isn't able to fully trust that that person really cares about you or is really invested in the relationship with you. So what will often happen is if that person doesn't respond to you, or maybe you don't hear from that person in a couple of days, even if they were the last one to reach out to you, you might start having some thoughts about what it means that they haven't. And for some people, they can internalize that as, oh my gosh, this person doesn't care about me. They might feel the hurt. They might feel the fear. They might blame themselves. They'll tell themselves that they're not worthy of having a relationship, that they must have done something wrong. But the feeling that they're experiencing, the emotion that they're experiencing would be more directed inward. They would blame themselves. It's my fault. And maybe they'd become angry at themselves and beat themselves up, but it would be turned inward. For people that use anger as a coping mechanism, and it's not something we choose, it's just how we learn to respond. For people that anger is their go-to response because it's a way of coping with the other things, pushing the other things aside, in a situation like that, the anger is directed outward. And so you could become angry, or again, could be frustrated or even rageful. You could become angry at the person for not responding to you. You might say to yourself, they're being disrespectful. What's wrong with them? Why would they do this? They must have lied to me. Why would they tell me that I matter to them when they're not even willing to respond to me? So again, going inward versus outward. And those reactions, those thoughts, when it's directed outward, are in a sense redirecting from feeling the hurt or fear. And the hurt is the person isn't responding to me, and therefore they maybe don't care about me. And of course, that's going to feel hurtful. It could be fear even playing a role in that, of what that means for your relationship. It could also be fear of what it means for you to be able to trust yourself, because you've allowed yourself to believe that maybe this person does care, does want a relationship with you, whatever. And so when they're not responding, if you have an underlying belief of not being worthy, not being good enough, when that happens, then there's a good chance you're going to see that as evidence of that being true, which is going to cause you to likely, even if not consciously, question your own judgment. I knew I shouldn't have trusted this person. What was I thinking? Right? Can you relate to that? How often do we say those kinds of things to ourselves when something doesn't work out the way that we hoped it would? I knew I should have known better. Why did I do that? So often, again, we can turn it inward and beat ourselves up about it, become angry at ourselves about it, or we can turn it outward. Even if we don't actually ever say anything to that person, but the thoughts are outward toward that person, being angry at them, believing that they're doing something wrong. And maybe they are, maybe they're not. That's kind of beside the point. What really matters in terms of this context is what is happening internally with you. And I think we've all had this to a degree. It may be very short because we don't allow ourselves to be angry for any number of reasons, which I talked about in the other video. But it could still come up quickly. And then if our natural way of responding to that stuff is to shut down or beat ourselves up or numb by eating or drinking or sex or shopping or whatever it is, but we're doing something as a way of coping with that. And anger in this context is often a way of coping. Now, having said all of that, I think it's important to recognize that there are times that we can be angry and it's just pure and simple anger. That can certainly happen. But in the context of any sort of relationship, it often is secondary to hurt or fear. So one example that can come up often is being angry about like the bad things that are happening in the world, the bad things that people do. And of course, it makes complete sense that we would be angry about those things, right? Like being angry at a perpetrator for abusing somebody, or being angry at the fact that it happens, that there are so many people that it happens to, that victims are re-victimized by their families, the police, the justice system, the injustice in the world. Like there are so many things for us to be angry about, and that can be referred to as like righteous anger. And there's a place for that, right? Because that anger, that righteous anger, is motivating. It can definitely be motivating. Like we join marches, we fight to change laws, we create places for people to find support. Often those things come from anger, out of injustice. So again, nothing wrong with that anger, but what are you doing with that anger? And I would argue even that when we think of anger in terms of injustice, no matter what that injustice might look like, and there's a lot of that, well, throughout history, but I think we have been in a several year period at this point of feeling like we're fighting for so many different things. But even in those situations, while it can be very reasonable anger, there's still a level, realistically, of hurt and fear. And it may be hurt for other people. We may be feeling empathetic towards what it means to be a person of a certain religion or color or gender or any number of things. We can feel hurt for the children who are abused, for the children who are forced to carry a perpetrator's child. We feel hurt for them and maybe even for ourselves, but there's still some hurt that is there. There can even be fear about where it's going to lead, what it means in a bigger context, how long it's going to take to reverse or change. There can be a lot of fear in that. But when you are able to understand the feelings that you're having about it, then you can be motivated in a way that guides you to expressing that anger, to doing something with that anger in a way that is healthy. So what often tends to happen when we feel anger is we tend to push it aside. We tell ourselves that we shouldn't be angry. That's not a big deal. However, we're going to minimize it or deny it. Or we project it outward, which is definitely not good, right? Because we could hurt other people emotionally or physically. We can create difficulty for the people around us and create difficulty within us, because feeling that intensity of anger, that ongoing energy of anger and intense frustration, ongoing annoyance, that's not good for us. It's not good for our physical well-being, and it's certainly not good for our emotional well-being, and it can have lasting impact, a cumulative impact. And so when we can recognize what is really going on, okay, what am I feeling angry about? Why am I feeling angry about this? And that's a good question to ask yourself, and then be able to ask yourself, okay, am I feeling hurt about something? Am I afraid of something? And when you can recognize what is under that anger or frustration, when you can recognize what that is, then you can address the actual issue. So for example, going back to somebody not messaging you back, if you can recognize, okay, I'm feeling really hurt, I'm taking it personally that this person isn't responding, and I'm feeling like I never should have trusted this person. Well, then from that place, you can do things, whether it's through therapy, whether it is doing reality testing, whether it is noticing patterns of that showing up in your life, and that you can look at other examples with this person where they have shown you that they care. So there are things that you can do with it when you recognize that. And again, whether we're talking about a one-on-one situation or we're talking about injustice. Okay, I'm feeling overwhelmed by all of this and I'm just so angry, and you can feel, in a sense, you can feel almost powerless, which is interesting because part of the reason that we can feel anger in these situations is to feel a sense of empowerment, to feel kind of a sense of control over something. But it can feel overwhelming, particularly because you feel like there's maybe nothing that you can do about it. But when you recognize what is really happening there, then from that place, you're more likely inclined to want to connect with other people maybe who feel similarly. And that can go a really long way. You're more inclined to be able to take a step back from all that energy and think a little bit more clearly, and then create a plan, even if that plan is connecting with other people. Maybe that plan is distracting yourself in some way, because at that particular time, maybe there's nothing that you can do. So you do something in a way that is healthy, in order to distract yourself, to help lessen the energy that is present at that particular time. And in general, in terms of dealing with anger, I really do think that being able to understand the underlying stuff that's there is a huge part of that. And even if we think about, for example, physically abusive people, so whether it's a partner or even a parent, much of the time, there may be some caveats to that, there likely is, but particularly like if I'm thinking about like an abusive partner, even emotionally abusive, so not even necessarily physical abuse, though certainly physical abuse as well. That is happening because they are feeling the need to control something. And that's never an excuse. So when we act out in our anger, it doesn't matter what we're really dealing with, it's not okay. And I think that's important to recognize too. It doesn't matter how hurt we might be feeling. It's not okay to call somebody a bunch of names and yell at them continuously and berate them. Certainly never okay to hurt somebody physically. But when we can understand what's going on, then we can work on that. So in the case of an abusive partner, or even an abusive friend or family member, employer, for that person, there is something underlying that. And it could be fear of losing control. It could be fear of losing the relationship. It could be that they are feeling hurt about something, but instead of acknowledging that hurt and addressing the hurt, they become angry and explosive and do something that is not healthy. When we can recognize what's happening, when we can recognize what's really happening under the surface there, and we can address that thing, where we can recognize and feel the feelings that are there, understand the feelings, process the feelings, do whatever healing needs to happen that has created the struggle with those ongoing feelings, then we no longer respond in the same way. Like, yes, we're going to feel frustrated, we're going to feel angry at times, but instead of responding in the way that we've learned to as a way of coping, we begin to respond in a healthier way. We take some deep breaths, we step back, we notice what our boundaries are, we notice when we need to remove ourselves from a situation, we can reality test. So there's a lot that we can do in those situations. But I want to be clear, this is a practice. Like everything else in healing, knowing it, becoming aware of it is very important. It's the first step. But to really change that pattern, how that happens, whether it's over a period of 3 seconds or hours, it takes practice to become aware, to be with the feelings that are present, to be able to think in a more maybe logical way, but also compassionate way as we stay connected to what's happening physiologically. Because anger, like most feelings, generally speaking, but anger definitely, is a very physiological emotion. Like we feel it in our body, right? Even sometimes like your skin will change color, you might shake. There's definitely a physiological response happening there. So the practice is really relearning a different way of being when it comes to those types of feelings, learning to feel okay and safe with feeling hurt or afraid, feeling like you can trust in yourself to be able to manage that so that you no longer need those really intense feelings of anger. So I'd love to hear from you. What did you notice coming up for you? Can you relate to any of this? Share in the comments. Thanks so much for watching. If you haven't yet subscribed, make sure to do so. Click the bell for notifications. And if you found it helpful, make sure to give it a thumbs up so other people can find it too. I'll look forward to seeing you next time.